Dear learners, welcome back to WSE Global Issues, where learning English means understanding the world a little more deeply each time. Today, we begin with a strange truth that quietly shapes your life. The most powerful battles of our time are not fought with soldiers or ships, but with tiny circuits smaller than a grain of rice. Inside your phone, your laptop, even the traffic lights outside your home, there are chips so small you barely notice them. Yet these tiny objects now decide which countries feel secure, which economies grow, and which futures remain uncertain. This story is called Chip War: Why Your Future Depends on Tiny Circuits, and it is not science fiction. It is already happening, right now, all around us. Imagine a modern city suddenly freezing. Trains stop. Hospitals slow down. Banks cannot process payments. Not because of a natural disaster, but because a shipment of microchips is delayed thousands of kilometers away. This actually happened during the global chip shortage, and it shocked governments and companies alike. How did we become so dependent on something so small, so invisible? And more importantly, who controls it? As we explore this story together, feel free to support our work by liking, commenting, sharing, or joining us. Your support helps us continue creating thoughtful content that connects English learning with real global issues. This video is not just about technology. It is about power, trust, fear, and choice. As English learners, you are not just learning words. You are learning how to think, question, and connect ideas across borders. So as we move forward, keep one question quietly in your mind. If the future is built on tiny circuits, who do you think should be responsible for protecting it? And now, let us gently step back and see what is really going on beneath the surface. To understand the chip war, we need to clearly see what a chip really is. A semiconductor chip is a tiny piece of silicon that can process, store, and move information. It is the brain inside almost every modern device. Cars now need hundreds or even thousands of chips to control safety systems, navigation, and energy use. Smartphones depend on advanced chips to run apps, cameras, and artificial intelligence. Power grids, satellites, medical machines, and military systems all rely on them. In the past, chips were mostly a concern for engineers. Today, they are a concern for presidents and prime ministers. This shift happened quietly, but its impact is enormous. When chips become scarce or controlled by only a few players, entire societies feel the pressure. What is happening now is not simply a shortage or a business competition. It is a struggle over who designs, who produces, and who controls the most advanced chips in the world. A small number of countries and companies dominate different stages of this process. Some are strong in design, others in manufacturing, and others in the machines needed to make chips at the smallest scale. Because no single country controls the entire system, the world is deeply connected and deeply vulnerable. When political tensions rise, this fragile balance starts to shake. Governments begin to worry not just about prices, but about national security, economic survival, and technological independence. This is why the word war is often used, even though no bombs are falling. At the center of this issue are three powerful forces: technology, geopolitics, and everyday life. They meet in ways that are not always visible to us, yet they shape our future choices. When a country limits chip exports, another country's factories may slow down. When a new chip factory is built, it can change local jobs, education, and even migration patterns. As English learners watching this story unfold, it is worth pausing for a moment and asking yourself, how often do you think about the invisible systems that support your daily routine? The answer is not about guilt or fear. It is about awareness. Because once we see the system clearly, we are ready to explore how it was built in the first place. And that story begins decades ago, with curiosity, competition, and a belief that smaller could always be better. The story of the chip war does not begin with conflict. It begins with curiosity. In the late 1940s and 1950s, scientists in the United States were trying to solve a simple problem: how to make computers smaller, faster, and more reliable. Early computers filled entire rooms and broke down easily. Then came the transistor, invented at Bell Labs, which replaced bulky vacuum tubes. This single invention changed everything. It allowed electrical signals to be controlled with far less energy and space. At the time, no one imagined that this breakthrough would one day influence global power and security. It was simply about progress, efficiency, and the excitement of discovery. As decades passed, chips became smaller and more powerful, following a pattern later called Moore's Law. Roughly every 2 years, the number of transistors on a chip would double. This idea pushed companies and governments to invest heavily in research and manufacturing. During the Cold War, the United States saw semiconductors as strategic assets, especially for space exploration and military technology. Japan, meanwhile, focused on precision manufacturing and quality control, becoming a global leader in electronics by the 1980s. This period showed an important lesson. Chips were not just products, they were part of national strategy. Countries that mastered them gained economic strength and political influence. Over time, the chip industry became more global and more specialized. Designing chips, manufacturing them, and building the machines to make them required different skills and huge investments. Companies began to spread these tasks across borders to reduce costs and increase efficiency. Taiwan emerged as a key manufacturing hub, especially through companies that focused only on producing chips designed by others. This model was efficient, but it also created deep dependence. Many countries enjoyed cheaper and better technology without thinking about risk. Few asked what would happen if this system were disrupted. Looking back now, this global success story feels fragile, like a beautiful bridge built very fast. And as we move closer to the present day, we start to see small cracks appearing, quietly warning the world that history was about to change direction. Today, the chip war has moved from quiet planning rooms into public headlines. Governments openly talk about semiconductors as if they were oil or steel in the past. After the global pandemic, the world received a harsh lesson. Factory shutdowns, shipping delays, and sudden changes in demand caused a severe chip shortage. Car manufacturers in North America and Europe were forced to stop production lines because a single low-cost chip was missing. Hospitals struggled to replace aging medical equipment. Even popular game consoles and laptops became difficult to buy. This was not a small technical problem. It was a system-wide shock that revealed how thin and fragile the supply chain had become. In response, powerful countries began to act fast. The United States introduced large public investments to bring chip manufacturing back onto its own soil, offering financial support to companies willing to build advanced factories locally. Japan strengthened partnerships with foreign chipmakers while also rebuilding its domestic capabilities after decades of decline. Meanwhile, China increased efforts to become self-sufficient in chip technology, facing restrictions on access to advanced manufacturing tools and high-end chips. These restrictions were not only economic decisions. They were driven by security concerns, especially as artificial intelligence, surveillance systems, and military technologies became more dependent on advanced semiconductors. At the heart of the current situation is a technological gap. The most advanced chips, used for AI and high-performance computing, require extremely complex machines and years of accumulated expertise. Only a handful of companies in the world can produce them at scale. This has created a dangerous imbalance. Countries that depend on these chips worry about political pressure, sudden export controls, or even conflict. At the same time, companies face enormous costs. Building a single advanced chip factory can cost tens of billions of dollars and take years before producing a single chip. This means decisions made today will shape technology for decades. We can also see the chip war playing out quietly in classrooms and job markets. Governments are investing in science education, engineering programs, and research centers. Immigration policies are adjusted to attract skilled chip engineers. Cities that host new factories experience sudden growth, higher housing prices, and social tension. The chip war is not only happening between nations. It is happening inside communities, families, and individual lives. A young student choosing to study engineering today may unknowingly become part of this global struggle tomorrow. There is also a psychological shift taking place. Trust in globalization has weakened. For years, the world believed that efficiency and cooperation would always win. Now, resilience and control are becoming more important than low cost. Companies are redesigning supply chains to avoid relying on one region. Governments speak about friendshoring and de-risking, choosing partners based on political alignment rather than pure economics. This change sounds technical, but it reflects a deeper fear. The fear of being left powerless in a world where technology decides speed, strength, and survival. As English learners following this story, it is worth pausing here and asking yourself a quiet question. When technology becomes a tool of power, do you think cooperation or competition will shape the future more strongly? There is no easy answer. The present moment is full of tension, ambition, and uncertainty. And as these forces collide, the chip war becomes more than a race for innovation. It becomes a test of values, trust, and the kind of global system we want to live in. To understand why this issue feels so difficult to solve, we now need to look deeper, beyond headlines, into the many layers that make this conflict so complex. The chip war is complex because it sits at the intersection of many human systems, each with its own logic and fear. Politically, semiconductors have become symbols of sovereignty. Governments worry that dependence on foreign chips could limit their freedom to act during a crisis. A country that cannot access advanced chips may fall behind in defense, communication, and intelligence. This fear pushes leaders to support local industries, even when it is expensive or inefficient. At the same time, these political decisions can create tension with allies and trading partners, slowly reshaping global relationships in ways that are hard to predict. Economically, the chip industry follows a brutal reality. Only the biggest players can survive at the cutting edge. Research costs rise every year, while mistakes can destroy billions of dollars overnight. This encourages concentration rather than diversity. When only a few companies dominate advanced manufacturing, the entire world becomes dependent on their stability and goodwill. Smaller countries and smaller firms are often pushed to the edges, forced to choose sides or accept limited access. This is not a free market in the traditional sense. It is a highly controlled ecosystem where power and capital move together. Culturally, chips represent something deeper than technology. They are linked to national pride and identity. In Japan, the memory of past leadership in electronics still influences policy decisions today. In the United States, innovation is closely tied to the national story of progress and global leadership. In China, technological self-reliance is often described as a matter of dignity and historical justice. These narratives shape public opinion and make compromise emotionally difficult. When technology becomes part of a country's self-image, giving ground feels like losing face. There is also a human and psychological layer that is rarely discussed. Engineers working in chip fabrication plants operate in environments where a single mistake can ruin months of work. The pressure is intense, and the pace is unforgiving. At the same time, policymakers often speak in abstract terms, focusing on strategy and numbers, far removed from the daily lives affected by their decisions. This gap between human experience and political ambition creates blind spots. People become tools in a larger game, even though they carry the stress, the risk, and the responsibility. Finally, there is a moral contradiction at the core of the chip war. Semiconductors enable incredible progress. They power medical imaging, climate modeling, and educational access. Yet the same chips can strengthen surveillance systems and advanced weapons. Every technological leap carries both hope and harm. Societies must decide not only how to compete, but how to use what they create. This raises a difficult, deeply personal question for all of us. When progress brings power, who should decide how that power is used? The answer is unclear, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes the chip war so hard to resolve. As these layers overlap and pull against each other, simple solutions disappear. What looks like a technical issue becomes a mirror reflecting human ambition, fear, and values. And because these forces do not stop at national borders, the consequences spread outward, touching countries and communities far beyond the main players. To see the full picture, we need to step back and ask how this struggle reshapes the global system we all share. The chip war may seem like a struggle between a few powerful nations, but its impact reaches far beyond them. Countries that do not design or manufacture advanced chips still feel the consequences every day. When chip supplies tighten or prices rise, factories in Southeast Asia, South America, and parts of Africa feel the shock almost immediately. Electronics assembly slows down. Jobs become uncertain. Small businesses that depend on global supply chains face delays they cannot control or explain. For many workers, the chip war is not a political debate. It is the reason overtime disappears, contracts are canceled, or plans are postponed without warning. Global supply chains, once designed for speed and efficiency, are now being rebuilt for security and trust. This shift has costs. When companies move production closer to home or to politically friendly countries, products often become more expensive. These higher costs are passed on to consumers, including families who are already struggling with rising living expenses. A smartphone, a car, or even household appliances quietly carry the price of geopolitical tension. The chip war hides inside everyday objects, making global politics personal in a way few people fully notice. International relations are also changing shape. Countries are forming new technology partnerships while slowly distancing themselves from others. Trade is no longer just about profit. It is about alignment and loyalty. Smaller nations often face difficult choices. They may depend on one country for investment and another for technology. Choosing one side can bring protection, but it can also bring risk. Remaining neutral becomes harder as pressure increases. In this environment, diplomacy becomes more fragile, and misunderstandings can grow faster than trust. There is another group deeply affected but rarely mentioned: students and young workers around the world. Education systems are shifting to focus more on science, engineering, and digital skills. This creates opportunity, but also pressure. Not everyone has equal access to high-quality education or training. As technology races ahead, gaps between regions and social groups can widen. The chip war, in this sense, is also a struggle over who gets to participate in the future and who is left watching from the side. Environmental impact adds yet another layer. Chip manufacturing requires large amounts of water and energy. When new factories are built quickly to meet strategic goals, environmental concerns may be pushed aside. Local communities can face water shortages or pollution, even as they are told these projects are necessary for national security. Progress and sacrifice become closely linked, raising uncomfortable questions about who pays the hidden costs of technological competition. As we look at these global effects, it is worth pausing for a moment. When a decision made in one country can affect jobs, prices, education, and the environment across the world, can any nation truly act alone anymore? This question does not demand an immediate answer. Instead, It invites us to think more carefully about connection and responsibility. Because the future of the chip war will not only be written by those who lead it, but also by those who must live with its consequences. And that brings us naturally to the next step. What paths might the world take from here, and what kind of future could emerge from this tension? When we look ahead, the future of the chip war does not follow a single clear path. Instead, it opens into several possible worlds, each shaped by choices being made right now. In the most hopeful scenario, countries learn from recent shocks and invest not only in competition, but also in cooperation. Shared standards, limited but meaningful technology agreements, and crisis communication channels help prevent sudden breakdowns. In this future, chip production becomes more geographically balanced. No single region carries all the risk. Innovation continues, but with guardrails that reduce fear. Progress feels slower, perhaps, but more stable. For everyday people, technology becomes more reliable, and sudden shortages become rare memories rather than constant threats. A darker scenario is also possible. In this version of the future, mistrust deepens. Export controls grow stricter. Technology blocks harden. Countries duplicate supply chains at enormous cost, not because it is efficient, but because it feels safer. Innovation slows as knowledge becomes trapped behind borders. Smaller nations are pushed to choose sides, losing autonomy in exchange for access. Prices rise. Inequality grows. In extreme cases, a serious geopolitical crisis involving a major chip-producing region could trigger global disruption far worse than what we saw during the pandemic. In this future, fear becomes the main driver of policy, and the chip war turns from a warning into a wound. There is also a third, more uncertain path, which many experts believe is the most realistic. In this future, cooperation and conflict exist side by side. Countries compete fiercely in advanced chips while quietly relying on each other for older technologies and materials. Progress continues, but unevenly. Some regions move ahead quickly, while others struggle to keep up. Artificial intelligence, powered by advanced chips, transforms workplaces faster than societies can adapt. New ethical debates emerge about surveillance, automation, and human value. The world does not collapse, but it does not fully heal either. It simply becomes more complicated. What unites all these futures is one shared truth. Decisions made today will echo for decades. Chip factories built now will still shape technology when today's students are leaders. Education choices made by young people today will determine who has a voice in tomorrow's systems. This is why the chip war is not only about governments and corporations. It is about time. It is about what kind of future we are quietly designing, line by line, code by code. As you imagine these futures, take a moment to picture yourself inside them. In a world where technology decides speed and power, where do you hope cooperation still has a place? That question does not ask for prediction. It asks for intention. And with that thought in mind, we can now move toward the final reflection, where all these threads come together and return to something deeply human: choice, responsibility, and the future we share. Looking back at the story of the chip war, one thing becomes clear. These tiny circuits carry enormous power, not just over machines, but over lives, societies, and the future itself. From the early days of transistors to today's complex global supply chains, we see a pattern. Technology grows faster than policy, curiosity outpaces caution, and dependence spreads quietly until it becomes unavoidable. But the story does not end with fear. It ends with awareness and choice. Each of us, as learners, workers, and citizens, can understand the forces shaping our world and consider how we respond. Knowledge is the first step toward resilience, and reflection is the first step toward action. As the saying goes, the best way to predict the future is to create it. These words remind us that while the chip war may feel beyond our control, human decisions, collective and personal, still shape outcomes? Will we allow fear and competition to dominate, or will curiosity, collaboration, and care guide the next chapter? How can we, as individuals, support systems that are both innovative and responsible, resilient and ethical? For English learners, this is also a moment of inspiration. Engaging with real-world issues not only improves language skills, but also sharpens critical thinking. When you explore complex topics like the chip war, you are training your mind to question, analyze, and connect ideas, skills that matter far beyond the classroom. If this story has made you pause or think, I encourage you to take action. Share your thoughts in the comments, like the video if it helped you learn, and share it with someone who might be curious too. Together, we can explore the world, learn deeply, and imagine a future where knowledge, ethics, and technology work hand in hand. And finally, I leave you with one final question. When the smallest things hold the greatest power, how will you use your own understanding to shape the world?